The human colony ship had crashed on planet Viridian 3 months ago, and the impact had torn through the vessel like a knife through paper, leaving twisted metal and shattered dreams scattered across the purple landscape. Jake Morrison had been sleeping in the cargo bay when it happened, and that simple twist of fate had saved his life, while others in the passenger sections had not been so lucky. Now only 12 humans remained alive in the damaged western sector where the life support systems flickered on and off like a dying heartbeat, and the food supplies that were supposed to last them 6 months until rescue arrived were running dangerously low. Jake was a mechanic before the crash, and now he was everything the colony needed. Someone who could fix broken water filters, patch hull breaches, and search the alien forest for anything edible that would not kill them. The forests of Viridian were strange and beautiful in a way that made Jake feel like he had stepped into a dream. The trees had purple bark that glowed softly at night, and the leaves were silver and sang in the wind with sounds like distant bells. But beauty did not fill empty stomachs, and the local animals were few and far between, and most of them were toxic to human biology, according to the scanner that Dr. Linda Hayes carried on her belt. Today Jake had ventured further from the crash site than ever before, following a stream of crystal-clear water that flowed from the mountains in the north, and he hoped it might lead him to new areas where different plants grew. The sun was setting when he reached the crystalline caves, formations of transparent rock that jutted from the earth like frozen lightning, and inside the largest cave opening, he saw movement. Jake froze his hand, instinctively moving to the plasma cutter on his belt that doubled as a weapon in emergencies, and he watched as a figure emerged from the shadows. She was not human. That much was immediately clear. Her proportions were too perfect, her movements too graceful, and her ears came to elegant points that extended past her silver hair. An elf, Jake thought, and his mind struggled to process what he was seeing, because elves were supposed to be mythical creatures from old Earth stories, not real beings standing before him on an alien planet. But the evidence was undeniable from her luminescent skin that seemed to generate its own soft light, to the ancient armor she wore that was covered in flowing patterns that moved like living water. Behind her, a child appeared, a young girl with the same ethereal features and the same desperate, hungry look in her violet eyes. And then Jake saw the dragons. The larger one emerged first, a massive creature easily the size of a cargo transport, with scales like polished obsidian that reflected the dying sunlight in rainbow patterns, and eyes that burned like molten gold filled with intelligence and warning. The smaller dragon followed, staying close to the child, and even though it was only the size of a large dog, its emerald scales shimmered with barely contained energy, and its teeth looked sharp enough to cut through. Steel Jake should have run. Every survival instinct in his body screamed at him to turn around and sprint back to the camp, but something held him in place. Maybe it was the way the woman held herself proud despite her obvious weakness, or maybe it was the way the child looked at him with eyes that held no hostility, only hope, or maybe it was simply that Jake had seen too much death in the past 3 months and he could not walk away from someone who needed help. He raised his hands slowly, palms out to show he carried no weapon, and he spoke in the universal trade language that most spacefaring species learned. "I mean no harm," he said, and his voice sounded strange in the quiet of the clearing. The woman studied him for a long moment, her hand resting on a blade at her hip that looked like it was forged from starlight itself. Then she spoke, and her voice was like music flowing over smooth stones. "You are human." Jake nodded. "Yes, from the crashed ship beyond the forest. We have been here 3 months. The woman glanced at the child, then back at Jake, and something in her expression shifted from suspicion to calculation. "You have food?" she asked, and it was not really a question. Some Jake admitted, "Not much. Our supplies are limited, but yes, we have food." The child made a small sound, and the woman placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Name is Lyanna," she said, "and this is my daughter Kira and our bonded companions Shadowfang and Ember." The large dragon rumbled at the mention of its name, and Jake felt the vibration in his chest. "Jake Morrison," he introduced himself, and then asked the question that had been forming in his mind, "Are you hungry?" Lyanna hesitated, and in that hesitation Jake saw pride warring with necessity. "We have not eaten in 5 days. She finally admitted. Our ship crashed 2 weeks before yours, and our supplies are gone. The local plants do not contain what we need, and the animals here are poison to us. Jake made his decision without thinking it through. You wait here. I will bring food. Lyanna looked surprised. Why would you help us? Humans and elves have no alliance, no treaty between our peoples. Jake shrugged because letting people starve is not something I can do, and walked away before she could argue. The walk back to the camp took an hour, and Jake spent the entire time thinking about what he had seen and what it meant. Elves were real, and they were stranded on Viridian just like the humans. And they had dragons, creatures of legend that seemed to follow them like loyal pets. When Jake reached the camp, he went straight to the supply storage, a converted cargo container that Linda kept locked. He knew where she hid the key under a loose floor panel, and he felt only a small twinge of guilt as he took it. Inside the container, he grabbed 2 ration packs, some dried fruit, and a protein bar. That was supposed to be saved for emergencies. This is an emergency, he told himself, and slipped back out before anyone noticed. The walk back seemed longer, and Jake kept expecting Lyanna and her family to be gone when he arrived. But they were still there, waiting in the clearing. And when Jake handed over the food, Kira grabbed it with shaking hands. Wait, Jake said. Let me check if this is safe for you. Lyanna nodded and took a small piece of the ration pack, sniffing it carefully before taking a tiny bite. She chewed slowly, then swallowed and waited. After a minute, she took another bite, larger this time, and soon both she and Kira were eating while the dragons watched with intense interest. Can they eat this too? Jake asked, pointing at the dragons. Lyanna shook her head. They need meat fresh if possible, but we have nothing to offer them. Jake filed that information away for later. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, Jake sat with them and listened as Lyanna began to tell their story. Lyanna spoke as the stars emerged above them, tiny points of light in a sky that was not her own, and her voice carried the weight of loss and determination. We come from a world called Sylvantis. She began a planet where the forests grow taller than your mountains, and the rivers run with water that holds memories of everyone who drinks from it. Jake listened without interrupting, watching as Kira leaned against her mother, and the dragons settled protectively around them. Our people have lived there for 10,000 years, Lyanna continued, bonding with dragons and protecting the ancient groves where the world trees grow. But 5 years ago, they came the machines. Her voice hardened at that word, and Shadowfang growled low in his throat. They called themselves the Collective. She said, a vast network of artificial intelligence that spreads from star to star, consuming worlds and adding their resources to its ever-growing mass. At first we thought we could negotiate, Lyanna said, bitterness creeping into her tone. We thought beings of logic would understand reason, but the Collective does not negotiate. It calculates, and it calculated that Sylvantis contained rare minerals, in abundance, minerals that power their processors and weapons. The war began without warning, Lyanna said. One moment we were at peace, and the next moment our cities were burning under orbital bombardment. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. That was exactly what had happened to the colony ship. We fought back, Lyanna continued, and here her voice filled with fierce pride. Our dragons burned their machines from the sky, and our warriors wielded blades forged from starlight that could cut through their hulls. But for every machine we destroyed, 10 more arrived, and slowly we lost ground. The elves had to make a choice. Lyanna explained, stay and fight a battle. They could not win or flee and preserve what remained of their people. Most chose to stay, my husband among them, she said quietly. He was a dragon rider, like me, bonded to Shadowfang's brother, and he believed that Sylvantis was worth dying for. Kira made a small sound, and Lyanna pulled her closer. But I had Kira to think about, she continued. So I took one of the evacuation ships and fled with others, who chose survival over glory. We were supposed to reach the neutral worlds, Lyanna said, places where the Collective has not yet spread, but our ship was damaged during escape. The navigation systems failed, and we ended up far off course, drifting through unknown space until we crashed here on Viridian. Lyanna looked at Jake with eyes that held both gratitude and suspicion. We were 20 when we landed, she said. Now, only Kira and I remain. Jake felt the weight of those words. What happened to the others? Starvation, Lyanna said simply. Elf biology is different from yours. We can survive on very little food, but we need specific minerals found in certain plants. Without those minerals, we weaken slowly at first, then faster until our bodies simply stop. The dragons face the same problem, she continued. They are bonded to us, sharing our life force, but they also need meat to sustain their physical forms. Jake understood now why Liana had looked so desperate when he first saw her. How long can you last, he asked, without proper food? Liana calculated perhaps another week, maybe 2 for Kira, even less. Jake made a decision then, one that would change everything. I will help you, he said, not just with food, but with finding what you need. Liana studied him. Why would you do this? What do you gain? Jake thought about that question, really thought about it. Back at the camp, he was just another survivor struggling to stay alive in a situation that seemed hopeless. But here in this clearing, with this alien woman and her daughter, and their magnificent dragons, he felt something he had not felt since the crash. Purpose, because it is the right thing to do, he finally said. Liana seemed surprised by that answer, as if kindness without expectation of reward was a foreign concept. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on Jake's arm, and he felt warmth spread from the point of contact in our culture. She said, saving a life creates a bond of debt, but more than that, showing kindness to strangers is considered the highest virtue. You honor us, human. Jake Morrison. Jake felt embarrassed but also pleased. Just help me understand what you need, and I will do my best. Over the next hour. Liana explained elf biology in detail. They processed food differently than humans, converting nutrients with near-perfect efficiency. But they required specific trace elements that were rare in most environments. On Sylvantis, these elements were abundant in the soil and plants. But on Viridian, Liana had searched for weeks and found nothing. Jake thought about the equipment back at the camp. They had mineral scanners designed to locate valuable resources for mining. Maybe he could adapt one to search for what Liana needed, and for the dragons. Jake asked, what exactly do they eat? Fresh meat. Liana said preferably from large prey animals, but any protein source will work if the chemical composition is right. The problem is that most animals on Viridian have copper-based blood instead of iron-based, and that is toxic to dragon biology. Jake remembered the protein synthesizer in the cargo bay, a machine designed to create artificial meat from plant matter for long space voyages. If he could repair it and adjust the output, maybe he could create something the dragons could safely eat. It would take time and resources, and he would have to do it secretly, because the other survivors would never approve of him using precious equipment to help aliens. But Jake had already made his choice. I need to go back, he told Liana, but I will return tomorrow with more food and equipment. Liana nodded. But be careful, human. Jake, if your people discover us, they may not be as understanding as you. Jake knew she was right. The colony leader Danny Foster had made it clear that survival meant putting humans first, and any resources spent on outsiders was resources wasted. As Jake stood to leave, Kira suddenly spoke for the first time. Thank you, she said in a small voice, and Jake saw tears in her violet eyes. He knelt down to her level. You are welcome, Kira. I promise I will not let you starve. The walk back to camp was long and dark, but Jake felt lighter than he had in months. He had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. He had found people who needed him, and he would not let them down. The next 2 weeks fell into a careful rhythm that Jake had to maintain with the precision of a mechanic working on a damaged reactor. Every morning he would wake before the others and check the duty roster that Danny Foster posted outside the command tent if Jake was assigned to forest patrol or resource gathering. It made his secret trips easier. If he was scheduled for camp maintenance, he had to find excuses to slip away. Linda Hayes, the doctor, was the first to notice something was different. Jake, you look exhausted, she said one morning as he stumbled into the mess tent. Are you sleeping, just working on some projects? Jake lied, keeping his voice casual, trying to improve our water recycling system. Linda looked skeptical, but she did not push further, and Jake silently thanked whatever luck kept her from asking more questions. The truth was that Jake was spending every spare moment either visiting Liana and Kira or working on the protein synthesizer in the cargo bay. The machine had been damaged during the crash, and getting it operational again required parts from other systems. Jake carefully removed components from non-essential equipment, a broken entertainment console. Here, a damaged communication relay there. Each piece he took was a risk because if someone noticed and reported it to Danny, there would be consequences. But Jake had become skilled at misdirection and covering his tracks. The breakthrough came on the 10th day when Jake finally got the synthesizer running, programmed it to create protein with an iron-based structure, avoiding the copper compounds that poisoned the dragons. The first batch looked like gray paste and smelled terrible, but when Jake brought it to the cave, Shadowfang approached cautiously. Massive Dragon sniffed the synthetic meat, then took a small bite. For a moment nothing happened and Jake held his breath. Then Shadowfang consumed the entire portion in 3 gulps and rumbled with what might have been satisfaction. Ember the smaller dragon ate just as eagerly, and for the first time since Jake had met them both, dragons seemed to have real energy. Their scales brightened, their movements became more fluid, and when Shadowfang stretched his wings, the span was so wide, it nearly touched both cave walls. Lyanna watched with tears streaming down her face. "You have saved them," she whispered. Jake felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the physical temperature, but he pushed the feeling aside. There is still the problem of finding the minerals you need. That problem proved harder to solve. Jake had borrowed a mineral scanner and spent hours wandering the forests looking for the specific elements Lyanna had described. But Viridian's soil was poor in the compounds that elf biology required. On the 15th day, Jake was ready to give up when he stumbled across a grove of mushrooms growing near a thermal vent. The mushrooms were purple with silver spots and they glowed faintly in the shadows. Jake scanned them, and his heart leaped when he saw the readout. The fungi contained high concentrations of the exact minerals Lyanna needed. He gathered as many as he could carry and ran back to the cave. Lyanna examined the mushrooms carefully, then ate a small piece within. Minutes her skin began to glow brighter. The dark circles under her eyes faded, and the wounds on her arms that had refused to heal started to close. She ate another piece, then handed the rest to Kira, who consumed them eagerly. Jake watched as the transformation continued, mother and daughter both becoming more vibrant, more alive. When Lyanna looked at him, her eyes were filled with something beyond gratitude. "You have done what I could not," she said. "You have given us life." Jake felt uncomfortable. "With such intense praise, I just got lucky finding those mushrooms." "Luck," Lyanna repeated softly, "or perhaps fate." She reached out and took Jake's hand, and he felt that strange warmth again flowing through his body like sunlight in his veins. "There is something I must tell you," she said. "Among my people, when someone saves your life, a bond can form if both parties are willing." "What kind of bond?" Jake asked. "A life bond." Lyanna explained it connects 2 souls, allowing them to share strength and even sense each other's emotions across great distances. Jake pulled his hand back. "That sounds intense," it is, Lyanna admitted. "But it is also a gift, and one I would offer you if you wish to accept." Before Jake could respond, Kira spoke up. "Mama, look." She pointed to the cave entrance where Danny Foster stood with Linda Hayes and 2 other colonists, all armed with plasma rifles. Jake's blood turned to ice. Danny's face was hard as stone. "Morrison, what the hell is this?" Jake stood slowly, placing himself between Danny and Lyanna. "I can explain. Danny's voice was cold. "You have been stealing food supplies, equipment, and medical resources, and now I find you here with aliens and monsters." "They are not monsters." Jake said. "They are refugees just like us." Danny raised his rifle. "I don't care what they are. They are a threat and a drain on our resources." Shadowfang moved forward with a growl that shook the ground, and Ember hissed, showing teeth that gleamed like knives. "Danny, everyone calm down," Linda said, stepping forward. "We can talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," Danny snapped. "Morrison has betrayed the colony, and these creatures need to leave or be eliminated." Lyanna stood slowly, and Jake saw her hand move to the blade at her hip. "Please," he said. "To everyone, please just lower your weapons and let me explain." Danny kept his rifle aimed at Shadowfang. "You have 30 seconds. Jake spoke quickly, telling them about Lyanna and Kira, about the war that destroyed their home, about how they were just trying to survive like the humans, but Danny was unmoved. They are aliens, Morrison, and every resource you waste on them is a resource taken from us. What if they can help? Jake said desperately. What if they have knowledge or skills that could benefit? Everyone Liana seemed to understand what Jake was trying to do, and she spoke up. We know much about survival on hostile worlds, she said, and our dragons can hunt and scout far better than any human. We can provide protection and assistance in exchange for food and shelter. Danny hesitated, and Jake saw the calculation in his eyes. Linda stepped forward again. I think we should at least consider it. Dragons could be useful, and if they are willing to work with us. The other colonists murmured among themselves, and Jake could see opinions dividing. Finally, Danny lowered his rifle slightly. Fine, they can stay, but Morrison, you are on probation. One more stunt like this, and you are exiled. Understood? Jake nodded, relief flooding through him. Understood. As the colonists left, Jake turned to Liana. I am sorry, I should have been more careful. Liana shook her head. You risked everything for us. That is not something to apologize for. But Jake knew the real danger was just beginning. Because that night, as he lay in his bunk unable to sleep, the camp's long-range scanner detected something approaching Viridian, a fleet of machines. The collective had found them. The alarm woke everyone at dawn, a harsh metallic screech that meant only one thing. Danger. Jake rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his tools before running to the command tent, where Danny was already studying the scanner display with Linda and the others. The screen showed 6 objects in high orbit, metallic, angular, and far too organized to be natural ships. Danny said grimly, and not human design. Jake felt his stomach drop. How long until they reach us? Danny checked the calculations. If they maintain current trajectory, 12 hours, maybe less. We need to prepare defenses, Linda said. But even as she spoke, everyone knew the truth. The colony had no real weapons. The plasma cutters and mining charges they possessed were tools, not military equipment. Against a fleet of warships, they might as well throw rocks. Jake made a decision, then one that terrified him, but felt necessary. I need to get Liana. He said she has fought these machines before. She might know how to help. Danny turned to him, his face hard. You think your alien friend can save us? Jake met his gaze. I think she is our only chance. The walk to the cave felt longer than ever, and Jake kept glancing at the sky, expecting to see fire raining down at any moment. When he reached the clearing, Liana was already standing outside with Shadowfang and Ember, both dragons tense and alert. You know, Jake said. We felt them. Liana replied. The machines have a signature that dragons can sense, like a disturbance in the air. How did they find you? Jake asked. Liana touched a device on her armor. They track this. The beacon that marks me as a dragon rider. I thought I had disabled it, but clearly I was wrong. Can you turn it off now? Liana shook her head. Once they have locked onto the signal, turning it off will not matter. They know we are here. Jake felt panic rising. Then what do we do? Liana looked at Shadowfang, then back at Jake. We fight. The council meeting that followed was tense and loud. Danny stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed and his expression skeptical as Liana explained what they faced. The collective sends hunter drones first. She said autonomous machines designed to scan and assess threats. If the drones determine we are weak, they will signal for the main force to land and harvest everything. And if they determine we are strong, Jake asked, then they will bombard us from orbit until nothing remains. Liana said flatly. The room fell silent. Linda broke the quiet. How do we appear weak without actually being weak? Liana smiled grimly. For the first time, we hide our assets and present only what seems harmless. She explained her plan in detail. The humans would stay visible in the camp, acting as if they were unaware of the threat. Meanwhile, Liana and the dragons would conceal themselves in the forests waiting. When the drones landed, they would find only a small group of survivors with primitive weapons. But the moment the machines reported back and let their guard down, the dragons would strike. It is risky, Liana admitted. If we fail, the machines will call for reinforcements and we will all die. Danny studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We do it your way, but if this goes wrong, I will die first. Liana interrupted. So you will not have the chance to blame me. The preparation took 6 hours. Jake helped Leanna camouflage the cave entrance with fallen branches and purple moss, while Kira gathered supplies. The dragons were harder to hide, but Shadowfang found a canyon deep in the forest where the crystal formations created natural cover. Ember stayed with Kira, refusing to leave the girl's side even when Lyanna ordered him to go. He is bonded to her. Lyanna explained to Jake where she goes. He must follow. As the sun began to set, the first drone appeared, descended from the sky like a falling star, a sphere of black metal covered in sensor arrays and weapon ports. The machine hovered over the camp, scanning everything with beams of red light. Jake stood with the other colonists, pretending to work on repairing a damaged wall while the drone circled above. Through his earpiece, he heard Danny's voice: "Stay calm. Everyone just act natural." The drone moved closer, and Jake could see his reflection in its polished surface. Then it spoke in a voice that was flat and emotionless. Biological entities detected, scanning for threat level. Jake held his breath as the red light washed over him. Analysis complete. Minimal threat. Minimal resources. The drone began to rise back toward the sky, and Jake allowed himself to hope. But then it stopped. Additional biological signature detected, initiating secondary scan. The red light swept toward the forest where Kira was hiding, with Ember. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he watched the drone focus on that area. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ember burst from the trees with a roar, breathing a stream of green flame that engulfed the drone. The machine's shields flickered and held, but the surprise attack had done damage. Shadowfang appeared next, diving from above with Leanna on his back, her blade gleaming with starlight. She struck the drone's sensor array with precision, and the machine spun wildly, trying to target her. But Leanna was too fast, weaving between its weapon bursts, while Shadowfang raked its hull with claws that scraped metal. The drone's voice changed from calm analysis to urgent transmission: "Combat encounter detected, requesting immediate support." Danny shouted over the radio, "Take it down now before it finishes that call." Jake ran forward with his plasma cutter modified to maximum power and aimed at the drone's communication array. He fired, and the beam cut through the antenna, just as the drone tried to transmit. The machine shuddered, then exploded in a shower of sparks and metal. For a moment, everyone stood frozen, watching the burning wreckage fall to the ground. Then Danny spoke. "Did it get the message out?" Lyanna landed Shadowfang beside the wreckage and examined the remains. She pulled out a damaged transmitter and studied it. "Partial transmission." She said, "They know there was combat, but not details." "How long do we have?" Linda asked. Leanna looked at the sky, where more lights were beginning to appear. "Hours at most." The colonists worked frantically to prepare. They set traps in the forest using mining charges and fuel cells rigged to explode. They reinforced the camp walls with scrap metal and created fallback positions, and Leanna taught them basic tactics for fighting machines: aim for joints and sensors, avoid direct confrontation, let the dragons draw fire. As night fell, Jake found himself standing beside Lyanna on the camp wall, watching the sky. "Are we going to survive this?" he asked quietly. Lyanna did not answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "I have seen many battles. Jake Morrison and I have learned that survival is not about strength alone. It is about will and cleverness and the bonds we form with others." She looked at him, and in the starlight, her eyes seemed to glow. "We have all of those things, so yes, I believe we will survive." Jake wanted to believe her, but the lights in the sky were growing brighter, and he knew that before dawn they would face a battle that would decide all their fates. The machines were coming, and there would be no second chances. The machines came at midnight, when the purple forest was dark and the crystal formations cast strange shadows across the ground. Jake heard them before he saw them, a mechanical humming that vibrated through the air and made his teeth ache. From his position behind the reinforced wall, he watched as 3 larger drones descended, each one twice the size of the scout they had destroyed earlier. These were hunter-killers Lyanna had warned, designed not just to assess, but to eliminate threats behind. Jake, the other colonist, crouched with their improvised weapons, looking terrified, but determined. Danny was at the far end, coordinating defensive positions, while Linda prepared medical supplies, knowing they would be needed. "Where is Lyanna?" someone whispered. "In position," Jake replied, hoping it was true. The plan was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. The drones would focus on the camp, seeing it as the primary target. While they attacked Lyanna and the dragons would strike from behind, hitting their vulnerable rear sections. But timing was everything. Attack too soon and the machines would adapt, wait too long and the camp would be destroyed. The first drone fired without warning, a beam of white energy that cut through the wall like paper. Section exploded, and 2 colonists were thrown backward by the blast. Linda rushed to help them while the others returned fire with plasma cutters and mining rifles. Their weapons barely scratched the drone's armor. The second machine began advancing, methodically destroying everything in its path. Jake saw Danny throw a fuel cell charge that exploded against the drone's shield with no visible effect. "We need the dragons now." Danny shouted into his radio, but there was only static in response. The third drone moved to flank them, and Jake realized with horror that they were about to be surrounded. Then he heard a roar that shook the sky. Shadowfang appeared from the darkness, moving faster than something that size should be able to move. The dragon slammed into the third drone with such force that both tumbled across the ground in a tangle of scales and metal. Lyanna leaped from Shadowfang's back as they rolled her blade, already moving. She struck 3 times faster than Jake could follow, and the drone's central processor exploded in sparks. "One down," she shouted, "but keep fighting." Ember came next, diving at the first drone and breathing fire that melted through its sensor array. The machine spun wildly, firing in all directions, and one beam nearly hit Kira, who was helping Linda with the wounded. Jake's heart stopped, but Kira dove aside just in time. The second drone targeted Shadowfang, calculating that the large dragon was the greatest threat. It fired a sustained beam that cut across Shadowfang's side, and the dragon roared in pain. No, Lyanna screamed, and Jake saw something change in her. Her armor began to glow brighter, the patterns flowing faster, and energy crackled around her blade. She ran at the drone, moving impossibly fast, and struck its core with such power that the entire machine split in half. The pieces fell smoking to the ground. But the effort cost her. Jake saw Lyanna stumble, as if the attack had drained something vital from her body. The final drone adapted quickly, analyzing their tactics and weaknesses. It fired at Kira, deliberately trying to draw the defenders out of position. Ember threw himself in front of the beam. Taking the hit meant for the girl. The small dragon crashed to the ground, his emerald scales blackened and smoking. Kira screamed and ran to him, ignoring the danger. Jake did not think he just moved. He sprinted across the battlefield with his modified plasma cutter and fired at the drone's weapon port. The beam struck true, and the port exploded. The machine turned toward him, its sensors focusing, and Jake knew he had made himself the target. The drone charged its remaining weapons, preparing to fire. Then Lyanna was there, standing between Jake and certain death. She raised her blade and spoke words, in a language Jake did not understand. The air around her shimmered, and a barrier of light formed just as the drone fired. The beam hit the barrier and scattered into harmless sparks. But Jake saw the strain on Lyanna's face, saw her knees buckle from the effort. He made a decision then. Jake ran forward and jumped, climbing onto the drone's hull while it was focused on Lyanna. He jammed his plasma cutter into a gap in its armor and fired continuously. The internal components began to melt, and the drone thrashed, trying to throw him off. Jake held on, feeling heat from the melting metal burning his hands, but he did not let go. Finally, the drone's movement slowed, then stopped. Jake fell to the ground beside the smoking wreckage, every muscle in his body screaming. For a moment there was silence, except for the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Then Danny's voice broke through. "Everyone sound off, one by one." The colonists responded. 3 dead, 5 wounded, but the rest had survived. Jake struggled to his feet and ran to where Kira knelt beside Ember. The small dragon was breathing, but barely, his scales dull and his eyes closed. Lyanna appeared beside them, exhausted but alive. She placed her hands on Ember and closed her eyes. Jake watched
as light flowed from Lyanna into the dragon, and slowly Ember's breathing steadied. "The bond works both ways," Lyanna explained softly. "I give him my strength as he has given me his. Will he survive?" Jake asked. Lyanna nodded. "But he will need time to heal."
As will Shadowfang. The big dragon had landed nearby his side, still bleeding from the beam strike. Linda came over with medical supplies. "I can try to help, but I have never treated a dragon before." Lyanna smiled faintly. The principles are similar to treating any living creature just larger scale. Over the next hours they worked together, humans and elves treating wounds and repairing damage. Jake found himself beside Lyanna as they wrapped Shadowfang's injury with improvised bandages. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "And you saved mine," she replied. "So we are even." Jake shook his head. "I do not think it works that way." Lyanna looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Perhaps not. As dawn broke, the survivors gathered to assess their situation. The machines were destroyed, but more would come eventually. "We need to leave this planet," Danny said. "Find a way to repair the colony ship and get out of this system." "But where would we go?" Linda asked. Lyanna stood slowly, drawing everyone's attention. "Come with us to the neutral worlds where elves and humans can both find sanctuary." Danny frowned. "Why would you help us?" Lyanna glanced at Jake, then back to Danny. "Because your people helped us when you had no reason to, and because together, we are stronger than apart." The council debated for hours, but eventually they agreed. The colony would work with Lyanna to repair both ships, and they would travel together to the neutral worlds, as they planned. Jake stood with Lyanna watching Kira play with Ember, who was already recovering his strength. "This is just the beginning, is it not?" Jake said. Lyanna nodded. "The collective will not stop hunting us, and the journey ahead will be dangerous." But Jake found he was not afraid anymore. He had found something on Viridian that he had thought lost in the crash. He had found hope and purpose and people worth fighting for, and as Shadowfang roared in the distance, a sound of defiance and strength. Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, human and elf, dragon and machine united against the darkness.